Let's start off by crediting South Florida. They played with the appropriate level of force and competitiveness. Really did a.
What if the biggest sports snub of the decade wasn't just a mistake, but a meticulously planned cover-up that is now completely unraveling in the most spectacular fashion imaginable? For weeks, the world has been locked in a furious debate over why Clark, the single most electrifying and culturally significant player in basketball, was inexplicably left off the Team USA Olympic roster. The official story, carefully curated and delivered with a straight face by the selection committee, was a narrative built on buzzwords like experience, chemistry, and finding the perfect strategic fit. But new information, explosive and paradigm-shifting, has clawed its way to the surface, suggesting the real reasons were far more sinister. A cocktail of pure jealousy, corporate greed, and a deep-seated fear of a new queen taking the throne. This isn't just a story about a roster spot anymore. It's a story about how a humiliating under-the-radar performance in a forgotten gym forced the team's coach into a shocking private apology that has now rewritten the future of the entire sport. The narrative they sold the public was deceptively simple and, in their insulated world, completely justifiable. The selection committee, fronted by head coach Cheryl Reeve, insisted that their decision was a product of cold, hard logic. They claimed they needed a roster of seasoned veterans, a unit of players who had bled for the program for years, who understood the unique pressures of the international game and the complexities of FIA rules. They pointed almost condescendingly to Clark's supposed defensive vulnerabilities and her youth, by framing the decision as a painful but necessary sacrifice for the greater good of securing a gold medal. It was a classic establishment play: praise the newcomer's talent, but insist she needed to wait her turn to pay her dues. But the public, for the first time in a long time, wasn't buying the propaganda. The backlash was not just a ripple of dissent. It was a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated outrage. From the highest-paid analysts on ESPN's morning shows to casual fans firing off furious messages on social media, the consensus was deafeningly clear. Leaving Clark at home was not just a bad basketball decision. It was an act of profound cultural and financial insanity. They were willingly, almost gleefully sidelining a generational phenomenon. A player who was single-handedly driving viewership, ticket sales, and mainstream interest in women's basketball to levels previously thought impossible. The excuses felt hollow, like a thin veil draped over a much uglier truth. They were a flimsy, transparent pretext for something deeper, something far more personal. And as the foundation of their story begins to crack under the weight of new revelations, it turns out that's exactly what it was. The real war wasn't being fought on a spreadsheet of stats. It was being waged in the shadows of the locker room. The truth is, the decision to snub Clark was never purely about strategy. It was about ego, power, and the primal fear of irrelevance. For years, a powerful old guard has maintained an iron grip on the culture of Team USA. Players like Diana Taurasi, often hailed as one of the greats, and have been the undisputed alpha of the team for nearly 2 decades. Taurasi herself had already fired a warning shot, famously welcoming Clark to the WNBA with a harsh dose of reality and a dismissive tone, a clear signal that the veterans were not about to roll out the red carpet and cede the spotlight. But it went deeper than that. Sources close to the team began leaking whispers of a toxic, cliquey culture, one where certain established players felt existentially threatened by Clark's immense, off-the-charts popularity. Their alleged fear was that the entire Paris Olympic experience, what was supposed to be a final triumphant run for some of them, it would be completely hijacked and transformed into the Clark show. They imagined a scenario where their own legacies and contributions would be relegated to a footnote in the media frenzy surrounding the young superstar. The selection committee, and specifically Coach Reeve, was caught in an impossible position. Fearing a fractured, resentful locker room, they allegedly caved to the immense pressure from these powerful, decorated veterans. They chose the illusion of harmony over the certainty of generational talent. A short-sighted and cowardly decision that would soon prove to be catastrophic, not just for the team's public image, but for its bottom line. And that's where the real power players got involved. While the on-court performance was a looming concern, the immediate and undeniable damage was being done to their bank accounts, and the corporate titans holding the purse strings were beginning to move from quiet concern to outright panic. The Caitlin Clark effect is not a media-driven myth. It is a verifiable economic engine, a financial tsunami that lifts all boats. Her rookie games in the WNBA are shattering attendance records in every single city she visits, with teams moving their games to larger NBA arenas just to accommodate the unprecedented demand. Television ratings for Indiana Fever games, even on obscure weekday nights, are up by staggering triple-digit percentages, often outperforming major sporting events on competing networks. Her number 22 jersey became the top-selling jersey for any draft pick in the history of any sport, men's or women's, within mere hours of its release. USA Basketball and the Olympic Committee were not ignorant of these facts. They had the advanced analytics, the market research, the detailed financial projections. They knew with absolute certainty that putting Caitlin Clark on the team in Paris meant a guaranteed flood of millions in merchandise sales, a massive game-changing spike in viewership for their broadcast partner NBC, and a level of sustained global media attention that the women's team had never seen before. By deliberately leaving her off the roster, they weren't just making a basketball decision. They were making a conscious, deliberate choice to incinerate a financial windfall. It was without exaggeration a billion-dollar mistake, and the immediate consequences were about to hit them with the force of a freight train. The first tremors of the impending earthquake emerged during a series of poorly publicized international scrimmages, events intentionally kept far from the prying eyes of the mainstream media. The team was in its preparation phase for Paris, playing against various international squads in what were supposed to be low-stakes, confidence-building tune-ups. One of these games, according to insiders who have now broken their silence, was a FIA-sanctioned match against the national team from New Zealand. On paper, it should have been a complete and utter cakewalk, a glorified practice session, an easy 30-point win to build momentum. But it wasn't. What unfolded in that gym was a quiet catastrophe. The star-studded American team looked disjointed, lethargic, and shockingly vulnerable. Without a dynamic, transcendent playmaker like Clark, who can create her own shot from anywhere on the floor and bend the defense to her will, the offense stagnated into a predictable, ugly grind. They reportedly struggled mightily to pull away from the heavy underdog New Zealand team, looking utterly predictable and lacking the explosive game-breaking scoring punch that Clark provides in her sleep. The game was a silent humiliation, a damning and undeniable piece of evidence that the precious chemistry and experience they had prioritized was failing its very first, very basic test. It was the terrifying, clarifying moment that the committee and the coaching staff realized they had not just made a mistake, but a grave, potentially gold medal-costing miscalculation. But the fallout from the disastrous New Zealand game sent violent shock waves rippling through the highest levels of the organization. What was once a quiet, nagging concern among a few executives was now a full-blown five-alarm crisis. Coach Cheryl Reeve, who had so publicly and confidently defended the roster selection with an air of intellectual superiority, was now facing the grim, inescapable reality that her hand-picked team was deeply and fundamentally flawed. The quiet, polite whispers from sponsors and network executives transformed overnight into loud, angry, non-negotiable phone calls. They were all seeing the same terrifying picture. A team that was less exciting, infinitely less marketable, and now alarmingly potentially less dominant on the court without its biggest star. This immense, suffocating pressure from all sides forced Reeve's hand. In a subsequent seemingly innocuous press conference, she made a statement that on the surface seemed like standard boilerplate coach speak. She talked about the immense challenges of roster construction and the incredibly tough decisions that had to be made for the long-term health of the program. But sources deep inside the Clark camp claim it was a carefully worded, strategically delivered public concession, a coded message to the corporations and to Clark herself that she had heard them loud and clear. And what happened next, away from the cameras and microphones, was the real bombshell. It has now been revealed by multiple sources that a private direct phone call was placed to Clark and her agent. On that call, Coach Reeve allegedly offered a direct, unequivocal, and deeply humbling apology. It reportedly wasn't just a simple "I'm sorry," but a detailed and stunning admission that they had grossly underestimated the immediate positive impact she would have had on the team's offensive performance and, more importantly, its global public appeal. It was a desperate, almost panicked move to mend the bridge they had so carelessly and arrogantly burned, a calculated attempt to ensure that the future face of their sport would even be willing to wear the red, white, and blue for Team USA in the future. The apology was a stunning full-scale reversal driven not by sportsmanship, but by the cold, hard, terrifying truth that they needed her infinitely more than she would ever need them. This desperate act of contrition wasn't just Coach Reeve acting alone out of a newfound sense of guilt. The directive to make amends, to smooth things over at all costs, came from the very top, from the shadowy figures in boardrooms who truly control the levers of American sports. Powerful globe-spanning entities like Nike, which has a massive 9-figure multi-year signature shoe deal with Clark, were reportedly beyond furious. They had meticulously planned their entire global Olympic marketing campaign around her ascendant stardom, only to see their prized asset unceremoniously benched by the very organization they also sponsor. It was a potential civil war within the brand. Broadcasters like NBC, who paid billions of dollars for the exclusive Olympic rights, were staring down the barrel of a potential ratings disaster for the women's basketball games. They needed a marquee star, a compelling narrative to anchor their coverage, and the committee had just willingly handed them a far less interesting product. The U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee itself, the powerful governing body, recognized the catastrophic public relations failure. They saw a story that was spiraling out of their control, painting them and their selection process as out of touch, petty, and foolish. The order came down from on high: fix this and fix it now. The private apology wasn't about making things right with a slighted player. It was about corporate damage control on a global scale. It was a calculated business decision orchestrated by the corporate giants who suddenly and terrifyingly realized that the Clark brand was now more powerful, more influential, and more valuable than the entire Team USA machine itself. And in that singular moment when the entire power dynamic of women's basketball shifted on its axis forever, the very snub that was designed to humble her, followed by the team's humiliating performance and the subsequent secret groveling apology, has inadvertently bestowed upon Clark a level of power and leverage that no female basketball player in history has ever wielded. She is no longer just a talented rookie hoping to get an invitation to make the team. She is now the undisputed, inevitable future. The foundational player around whom the entire national program must now be built. The committee's pathetic attempt to put her in her place has backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. They have now proven to the entire world that the team is demonstrably weaker and less effective without her. They have proven that the sport's financial health and mainstream relevance is now inextricably tied to her presence on the court. When the time comes for the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles, there will be no committee debates, no closed-door meetings, no veteran whispers about chemistry. Clark won't just be on the team. She will be the team. She and her camp will be in a position to dictate terms, to have a significant say in coaching decisions, and to ensure the roster is constructed to maximize her generational strength. They tried to delay her coronation, but all their scheming and politics did was make her eventual crown that much heavier and more brilliant. So, what began as a story of shocking disrespect has now transformed into an epic tale of absolute power and ultimate vindication. The decision to leave Clark off the 2024 Olympic team was meant to be a harsh lesson in humility, a stark reminder that the old guard and the establishment still ran the show. Instead, it exposed that very establishment as weak, fearful, and utterly dependent on the very transcendent star they tried so desperately to cast aside. The forced secret apology wasn't an end to this saga. It was the explosive beginning of a brand new era. It's an era where Clark doesn't need to ask for a seat at the table because she owns the damn table, the chairs, and the entire building. Did Team USA's catastrophic, ego-driven mistake accidentally create the most powerful and influential player the sport has ever and will ever see? All the evidence now suggests that the answer is an undeniable and resounding yes.